So we're ready to put the phone back together, and we've replaced whatever we have needed to replace. So the way I'll start this is I'll actually make sure all these cables are back, and I'll typically just hold them with my thumb, and to make sure the Wi-Fi cable is back and that the antenna cable down here is back as well. And then obviously you can see the assembly, the ringtone module down here, the vibe motor, and the Wi-Fi antenna are all in the phone. Speakers, front-facing camera. So really all that we have to put in is the board, and then the screws and the brackets and stuff. So I'll make sure all the cables are back, and then I'll typically start with the top right of the board and just slide it kind of in an angle so it fits right in the top right corner where it's supposed to. And then a couple of things I want to make sure of is there's a little guide right here on the actual frame, and I'll make sure that the board will slide under that guide. You don't want to get it caught up or hooked on that. So make sure it slides under that guide, and then also that the cable down here is out of the way. And once all that's kind of out of the way and together, your board should then line up with all the posts for the screws. And once you get that, just kind of hold it in place. And typically what I'll do is I'll start down here at the bottom, and I'll put this screw in just to hold it right down here. And then the other screws, the two screws that we removed with the flathead, I'll actually start these with the Phillips head. It's easier, I find, to start them and then finish them up with the flathead. So you'll do the top one and then the bottom one. And then once those are in, a couple of turns, I'll just come back and just finish tightening them up with the flathead. Now, once you get those tightened up, we'll just kind of start at the bottom and move our way up. We'll kind of wind this antenna around the screw at the bottom and then under this little guide, and just line the plug up, and you get it close enough and in line, you should just be able to push that down and it should lock into place. Now once you get those in, the next thing you'll do is, if you replaced the charging cable, you'll need to bend it so it follows the contour of the cap right here. So typically what I'll do, you have the backing removed off of the adhesive, and then we'll just kind of pinch it right there and just give it a little half a bend down. You don't want to crease the cable, you just want to bend it a little bit, and then I'll bend it back a little bit the way that it was going, so it just gives it a nice little 45 right there. And then when you go to plug it onto the board, it just follows the contour of the shield right there. Now the other thing you'll want to do, and this is for any cable that you've replaced, is you'll want to transfer the old spacer from the old cable to the new cable. And what this will actually help with is, if the phone is dropped at all, then replacing the spacer can actually help keep this cable plugged in. If you don't have the spacer on and the phone gets dropped, it can actually partially unplug these cables, and then you may have to take the phone back apart and check the plugs. So once you get that spacer transferred, if you had to do that, we'll put the retaining bracket back on for the charging cable, and very carefully we'll put the one screw in. Then we'll get the other screw in as well, and then that should hold down the retaining bracket, and we'll just keep moving up the board. We'll get the screw right there actually holding the board down. Now a couple of things that we may have done is, these cables, if you replace any of these, then you will want to bend the cables accordingly, and usually you just follow the contour of the board. So This cable right here, the kind of the power cable, that's going to be the bottommost cable. And it just takes a little bit. You just want to kind of line up your finger. You don't need to handle these cables too roughly. You just want to line it up, and it should go on the board with not much difficulty. And then same with the camera cable. What we actually did with this is we bent it at a 45 up here, and then really it's just going to follow the contour of the board and then bend at a 90 right at this last little turn. And then once it's bent, you just kind of maneuver it into place and plug it right on the board. And then same thing with our volume and vibe cable. If we replace this one, you just want to give it a little gentle bend, nothing to crease it, but you just want enough to where it'll kind of follow the contour of the board and the frame, and it'll sit in place right there. Now we'll move up to the pin for the camera, and the way I'll do this, and you kind of notice, is I'll use my finger to just pinch it, and then I'll grab it with the screwdriver. And then same thing, I'll just hold this pin down and I'll slide the screw through the opening so it kind of holds it in place right there. And then with the phone turned just at a 90, I'll just line that screw up and tighten it down. If the screw doesn't line up against the top of the frame, I'll just turn it so it does line up before I actually tighten it down. And then once you get it lined up properly with these pins from the top of the phone right there, then you should be good to go. Now the thing, and this is why we put this on the outside, is you want to make sure you get that protective film and lay it over that pin. And then we'll put the camera in place, replug that cable. We'll make sure all these cables are properly secured, which they are, and then we'll just gently bend our digitizer and LCD cables back on the board. We'll grab our shield and make sure that we put these two bottom guides into the corresponding guides on the board itself. And then again, remember that this little lever right here, this little latch, is going to clip in between the cable and the board. So you don't want it on the outside of the cable, you want it just in between the cable and the board. And once it goes in there, it should lock underneath of the board. And then again, I'll just kind of hold the shield in place with my finger and or my thumb, and then once I get this top screw in, I can let go, and it should keep that securely in place. And then we really just have a couple more screws, and you notice with my thumb that I use it as a guide just to kind of help line the screw up a little easier than trying to kind of freehand it. Now with the antenna cable, this will actually go inside of that little guide that's sticking up on the board, and it may take you a little bit to kind of wiggle it in place, but you want to make sure that it goes on the inside of that cable, or I'm sorry, of that board. So once you get that in there, then you can give it a kind of a half a bend, and you'll line that up in place, and that should clip in. And we'll put this shield up top with that screw as well, excuse me. And then really last thing to do is the battery. we'll slide the battery. And usually what I find is if I can get the battery up top first and kind of on the sides just to kind of wiggle it down in place, that it should, it should line up with everything else. And if it doesn't, then then you can pop it out and reposition it. But you should be able to get it down and in place. But you'll kind of find the sweet spot and get it in there. And then we really just have we have the little bracket. And this is probably one of the trickiest parts to get in, because you need it lined up over the plug for the antenna, but also underneath the bracket for the battery. So once you kind of get that, you can hold it in place, tighten it down, tighten the other battery down, and then your battery door, you'll just get that in there and slide it up, and then we'll get our 2 screws in, tighten it down with your pentalobe screwdriver, and that's reassembling your iPhone 4S.